They thought they could take what was yours and hand it to someone else, as if the essence of who you are could be swapped out like a name on a list. They believed that by removing you from the equation, they could fill the space you left with someone more compliant, more convenient, someone who would not challenge the systems or disrupt the silence. But what they failed to understand is that your existence was never about convenience. It was about purpose. Every step you've taken, every hardship you've endured, every moment you stood your ground has been a thread in a tapestry too complex and too intentional to be unraveled by human hands. You are not a placeholder in your own life. You are the original blueprint, the one the universe designed for a role only you could fill. That's why every attempt to replace you has failed, and every scheme to push you aside has backfired. You weren't just a part of the story, you are the story. And no matter how much they try to reframe it, the truth always resurfaces. It's important that you hear this now, because the journey you're on is about to move into a phase where the very attempts to erase you will become the evidence of your irreplaceability. This is a season where masks will fall, where the substitutes will stumble under the weight of a calling they were never meant to carry. And as that happens, the light will shift back toward you. This is why I'm asking you to stay with me until the end of this message. Because what I'm about to share could be the missing piece that changes how you see everything you've been through. And while you're here, take a moment to write your most heartfelt wishes in the comments, along with 777, and subscribe to this channel. It's not just an act, it's a declaration, a way of aligning your voice with the energy of creation, sending a ripple into the universe that says you are ready for fulfillment of what's been promised. They've tried to build around you, to plant false narratives in the spaces you once stood. But the problem with replacing someone like you is that they don't understand the foundation you've been laying. You see, you haven't just been surviving, you've been sowing, quietly, beneath the noise of their schemes. You've been putting down roots in places they didn't even know existed. And those roots are deep, so deep that even when they cut you off on the surface, your growth didn't stop. It only expanded underground, in ways that made your eventual reemergence inevitable. And that's why, no matter what they put in your place, it never feels right. There's an emptiness in the atmosphere without you, a disruption in the current. People can sense it even if they can't explain it. The truth is, replacements may work in positions or titles, but they don't work in destiny. You can hire someone to fill a role, but you cannot replicate a purpose. And when your life is guided by purpose, you become irreplaceable not because of what you do, but because of who you are, your mannerisms, your presence, your unique way of holding the world together. Those are things that can't be copied, no matter how hard someone tries. That's why even the people who try to push you out have moments where they realize they missed the way you brought balance to everything around you. That longing, that gap, is the echo of your design. So, if you've been feeling invisible, if it seems like others are thriving in spaces that were meant for you, remember this. The universe is not in the business of making mistakes. There is a timing to your return, and it's being calculated with precision. The stage is being reset, the spotlight is being adjusted, and when it turns back to you, it will be undeniable, not because you fought your way into it, but because the truth has a way of clearing the stage for the one who was meant to be there all along. And when that moment comes, every attempt to replace you will be nothing more than proof that you were always the one they couldn't do without. They watched you walk away thinking you were defeated, assuming silence meant surrender, that your absence was their opportunity. But what they didn't understand is that silence was your weapon, absence was your strategy. While they scrambled to imitate your essence, to build a version of you that could be controlled, you were becoming something they couldn't predict. You were shedding what didn't belong, healing from the scars they tried to exploit, and most importantly, you were remembering who you truly were. The chosen ones are never defined by applause, titles, or validation. They are forged in isolation. And while the world moved on without acknowledging you, you were being fortified in secret places. You learned what couldn't be taught in rooms filled with noise. You mastered resilience not because you wanted to, but because you had to. Every unanswered message, every closed door, every room you weren't invited into became fuel. It lit something in you that imitation could never carry. Divine fire. That fire doesn't burn to destroy. It burns to reveal. And now it's starting to show. People who once questioned your worth are beginning to feel a shift. They sense your energy rising, and though they can't put their finger on it, something in them knows. The one they try to replace is coming back, not as who you were, but as something they've never seen before. You're not returning to prove a point. You're not rising to seek revenge. You're being positioned because your presence is required for the next phase. The purpose you carry is too heavy for imposters to hold. That's why their versions of you fall apart. They mimic your style, but collapse under your spirit. They repeat your words, but lack your authority. They wear your image, but cannot endure your calling. And the reason is simple. You weren't created, you were called. And callings are not transferable. This moment in your life is not just a comeback. It's a restoration of everything that was mishandled, misused, and misunderstood. You are not returning to pick up where you left off. You are returning to occupy a space that was never meant to be shared. It doesn't matter how long they held it. A borrowed crown never fits for long. The discomfort they feel isn't because they failed. It's because they know, deep down, the seat never belonged to them. And while they may never admit it out loud, they studied you. They watched how you moved, how you spoke, how you brought life into dead spaces. But what they couldn't imitate was your why, your heart, your ability to stay grounded when everything tried to uproot you. And that is what makes you irreplaceable. Because while they rehearse your actions, they never survive your trials. They never cried in the places you cried. They never bled where you bled. They never kept going when everything inside you begged to stop. You did. You kept going. That's what they underestimated. They thought removing you would erase your legacy. But a true calling leaves residue. The kind of imprint that lingers long after you've left the room. Your absence only made your worth more evident. Every attempt to substitute, you only magnified your uniqueness. And now, as everything begins to shift back into divine alignment, the universe is calling you forward. Not to reclaim what was stolen, but to step into what was preserved. That's the part they didn't expect. That while they were focused on replacement, God was focused on preservation. Not just of your name, but of your soul, your energy, your mission. You weren't buried. You were planted. And now it's time to rise with roots deeper than ever before. The illusion of their success was just that, an illusion, because true alignment can't be manipulated. They manipulated people, they manipulated outcomes, but they couldn't manipulate destiny. And now, destiny is reclaiming its place. In you, through you, around you. What they thought would break you became the blueprint for your rebirth. They built their plans on the assumption that your silence was submission, that your stillness was stagnation. But in reality, you were never idle. You were evolving, quietly, powerfully. Every night they didn't see you. You were shedding layers of fear, doubt, and everything they projected onto you. They didn't notice because they weren't watching with spiritual eyes. They only measured surface movements. But the real transformation was happening underground, in the soil and the roots, in the dark where no applause could reach. And that's where the chosen ones grow the most, away from the spotlight, away from the noise, away from false recognition. They didn't just try to replace your work. They tried to rewrite your worth. They whispered narratives about you, expecting those lies to stick like cement. But what they failed to realize is that truth doesn't fight for attention. It simply waits for its moment. And that moment is unfolding now. The illusions are falling. The replicas are collapsing. Because the presence you carry can't be duplicated by strategy, branding, or even manipulation. It's spiritual. It's sacred. It's divine. They try to become what you were, without understanding what it cost you to become it. They thought wearing your colors meant they held your calling. But a calling isn't worn, it's endured. And you, chosen one, endured the nights of confusion, the seasons of loneliness, the weight of expectation, and the silence that felt like abandonment. You endured the betrayal, the loss, the disappointment that left cracks in your soul. And instead of breaking you, it revealed you. Because this entire time, you weren't just building resilience. You were being authenticated, tested, refined. While they were performing for attention, you were preparing for assignment. While they were scrambling for approval, you were submitting to the process. And the process didn't make you perfect. It made you real. That's why their version of you always fell hollow. Because it lacked what can't be manufactured. essence. Now the essence is rising, the part of you that doesn't seek revenge but answers to a higher rhythm, the part of you that's not driven by ego but by alignment. And it's this version of you they never saw coming because they assumed you were gone. That's what happens when people are blinded by their own ambition. They confuse your quiet with defeat, but you weren't defeated. You were being hidden in plain sight. Hidden not because you were weak, but because you were sacred. There are some gifts too precious for premature exposure. You weren't delayed, you were protected. And that protection came in the form of being overlooked, misunderstood, underestimated. But now that protection is lifting and the unveiling has begun. And when the chosen ones rise, they don't announce it. They embody it. The shift doesn't need a headline. The presence will say what words cannot. The energy will enter rooms before your voice does. And what they tried to replace, the universe will now restore, not just to prove a point, but to fulfill a purpose. This is bigger than vindication. This is about positioning. Because what's coming next requires the original. No substitute can carry what was designed only for you. No echo can produce what was meant to be the source. And now, the source is stirring. The original blueprint is activating. And every closed door, every lost opportunity, every betrayal will now serve as proof, not of your pain, but of your preparation. They thought your journey was a detour, but it was a design. And while they were trying to force doors open, you were becoming the key. You don't have to knock anymore. You are the access point. And that is something no replacement can imitate. They studied your methods, mimicked your movements, and still, they couldn't replicate the result. Because the truth is, it was never about what you did. It was about who you are. They didn't realize that your influence didn't come from a strategy board, but from a spiritual assignment. You weren't self-made. You were spirit-led. And that's why their imitation always fell short, because they were chasing attention, while you were walking in intention. They tried to dissect your path like it was a formula to follow, thinking that if they copied your steps, they'd unlock your same doors. But they didn't see the inner breaking. They didn't feel the crushing weight of isolation that preceded your rise. They didn't witness the nights you laid awake, battling questions that tore at your soul. They didn't hear the whispers of doubt that tried to convince you to quit. And most importantly, they didn't experience the refining silence that transformed you when no one else was clapping. Because chosen ones aren't created through applause. They're forged in silence. While others were posting their highlight reels, you were living through what felt like exile. But the exile wasn't punishment. It was preservation. You were kept in a sacred place, far from the noise, so that when the time came, nothing about you would be performative. You see, the world honors what's loud, but heaven honors what's real. That's why you were hidden while others were celebrated. That's why your name was left out of rooms you were destined to walk into. It was never rejection. It was redirection. You were being carved out in secret, so that when the stage came, you wouldn't need to perform. You just need to be. And now the test is almost over. The test wasn't about surviving people trying to replace you. It was about whether you'd still honor the process, even when the process looked like punishment. Would you still trust the vision when your path felt invisible? Would you still believe in the promise when your timeline shattered? And you did. Even with trembling hands, you held on. That's what they didn't count on. They expected you to fold when it got lonely, to break when it got silent, to give up when you were overlooked. But you did something rare. You stayed faithful. You showed up, even when it didn't make sense, even when it felt unfair, even when it hurt. And that is what separated you. Because being chosen isn't about being better. It's about being willing. Willing to walk the narrow path. Willing to carry the weight of a calling that most wouldn't dare to hold. Willing to keep going without applause, without clarity, without company. And now, that willingness is about to be honored in a way that no imitation could ever touch. This is not just your time, it's your return. Not just to a platform, but to your position. The position they tried to steal. The seat they thought they could fill. But a stolen chair never brings peace. And what's built on someone else's identity will eventually crumble under the weight of its own pretending. And while they scramble to keep up the image, you're walking into alignment. No rushing, no proving, just unfolding. Because when it's your season, the doors won't just open. They'll recognize you. They'll respond to you, not because of force, but because of frequency. You don't need to announce yourself anymore. The energy has already gone ahead of you. The preparation has already positioned you. The silence has already strengthened you. And what's about to manifest will make it clear. You were never replaceable. You were simply being revealed. The irony is, they thought they could take what was meant for you simply by appearing ready. They thought presence equaled purpose, and visibility equaled validity. But purpose is deeper than performance, and destiny never answers to deception. What was anointed for you carries a specific frequency that only responds to the truth of your essence. You didn't rise because you pushed your way forward. You rose because something eternal was pulling you toward alignment. You didn't climb by stepping on others. You grew through obedience, through surrender, through moments when you wanted to scream. But instead, you stayed quiet and let your character speak for you. They only saw your public strength, but they never saw your private submission. They saw the fruit, but not the root. They saw the outcome, but never the cost. And yet, they tried to wear your crown without enduring your cross. They tried to echo your voice without ever being silenced themselves. They wanted your glow without enduring your growth. But heaven doesn't work like that. You weren't given this favor by mistake. You were trusted with it. You didn't stumble into your calling. You were selected through the fire. That's why every attack against you backfired. Because you weren't built on shallow ground. You were rooted in something sacred. When storms came, others scattered, but you stood, not because you didn't feel the wind, but because you had already survived worse. You were already tested in places where no one saw. You had already walked through nights that should have taken your light, but instead refined your clarity. So now, the shift is no longer something you're waiting for. It's already begun. You've probably felt it in the small ways. Less resistance in your spirit, more peace in your boundaries, a softening in how you carry yourself. You're no longer trying to prove you're chosen. You simply are, and that knowing is magnetic. It draws in what aligned and repels what no longer fits. What once felt like delay is now being revealed as divine strategy. You weren't stuck. You were being preserved. Like a seed underground, it looked like nothing was happening, but roots were being formed. Depth was being cultivated. And now that the surface is cracking, others will assume you rose overnight. But you know better. You know the years you sowed in silence, the prayers whispered in exhaustion, the dreams you kept feeding even when the light seemed gone. There's a dignity to the way you endured. You never needed to clap back. You never needed to chase after validation. Your life became the evidence. Your consistency became the testimony. And now, heaven is echoing your name into rooms where your hands haven't even knocked. The opportunities coming aren't random. They're rewards. Not for perfection, but for persistence. For the way you stayed soft in a world that tried to harden you. For the way you kept loving when it felt easier to shut down. You are the embodiment of what it means to carry divine fire without burning others. You've been refined, not ruined. Strengthened, not silenced. Positioned, not punished. And every closed door, every betrayal, every misunderstanding, it was all working for this moment. Not one tear was wasted. Not one season was in vain. And now, you don't even need to announce a comeback. You've already become. You were never in competition, even when they made it seem like you were falling behind. Their rush was rooted in insecurity, but your stillness came from discernment. You understood something they didn't. That what's meant for you doesn't require you to chase it down in desperation. It will find you when your spirit is ready to carry it. Not before, and certainly not on anyone else's timeline. They mistook your pause for weakness, not realizing that the quiet seasons are where the strongest foundations are built. While they were posting highlight reels, you were doing soul work. While they were shouting for attention, you were learning how to listen. You were discovering who you are without the applause, without the affirmation, without the external titles that make people feel seen, but not necessarily whole. And that's why you're irreplaceable. You became the kind of person who could hold a blessing without letting it inflate your ego. You learned how to shine without needing others to dim. You learned how to celebrate others even when no one was clapping for you. And because of that, heaven trusted you with a weight most people would collapse under. They didn't understand your silence because they weren't meant to. They couldn't grasp your path because they weren't equipped for it. But you were. That's the part they didn't calculate. That your quietness was your strength. That your time in the background was refining you, not defining you. You weren't waiting idly. You were becoming. And now the ones who thought they replaced you will soon witness that there was never replacement to begin with. Because what's divine cannot be duplicated. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be worn like a borrowed robe. It must be lived, embodied, and anointed. And you carry that anointing not just in your words, but in your walk. In the way you rise again after being misunderstood. In the way you forgive even when it's not returned. In the way your presence shifts the atmosphere, not by force, but by truth. You are not just different. You were designed to be. Every season of isolation was a sacred invitation to get closer to the blueprint written for your life. You've carried burdens silently that would have broken most. You've had to keep walking with wounds that no one saw, praying for healing while still showing up with grace. And though the world overlooked that, heaven recorded everything. There is no seed of sacrifice that goes unnoticed in the spirit. And the harvest that's forming now is not just for you. It's going to overflow into others, too. You were never just being built for a personal breakthrough. You were being positioned to become the breakthrough for others. That's why the resistance was so intense. That's why they came for your mind, your identity, your voice. Because if they could have convinced you that you were replaceable, that your absence wouldn't matter, they could have stopped the ripple effect your life was destined to release. But they failed, because you're still here, still believing, still breathing purpose even when you're tired. You've seen the shadows, but you chose not to become them. You've walked through fire, but you didn't let it consume your compassion. That's rare. That's sacred. That's why they couldn't become you. Because they didn't know what it cost to be you. They thought it was about the spotlight, not the soul. But you always knew this wasn't about fame. It was about faithfulness. You stayed faithful when it was hard, when it was lonely, when it was unfair. And that faithfulness is why the doors opening now aren't just opportunities. They're alignments. They're divine confirmations that you weren't forgotten. You were simply being hidden, protected until the right moment. And now that moment is here. The unveiling has begun, not for attention, but for assignment. Because when God restores, He never brings you back to where you were. He lifts you higher. He multiplies what was stolen. He turns your scars into signs and your delays into design. And what's unfolding next in your life will leave no room for doubt. Even your enemies will have to admit, you were never meant to be replaced, because you were handpicked, set apart, and unrepeatable. They never realized that while they were focused on replacing your position, you were being elevated in your purpose. Because your purpose was never tied to popularity. It was never about being in the spotlight, never about the numbers, the applause, or the approval. It was about assignment. And assignments are eternal. They can't be taken from you, only postponed for refinement. That's why the silence hurt so much. You weren't just being ignored. You were being preserved. You weren't forgotten. You were protected. Because there were rooms you were never meant to enter through the back door. There were stages that required a deeper strength, and doors that only opened for the authentic. And because you refused to pretend, to water down your essence just to be accepted, those doors are now opening the right way, through favor, not force. You've always carried something sacred. Even in your lowest moments, something about you didn't fully break. Even when you were doubting everything, your worth, your calling, your direction, something inside you refused to surrender to despair. That's not just resilience. That's spiritual DNA. That's the divine code woven into you before time began. They couldn't erase it. They couldn't compete with it. They couldn't duplicate it. They tried to replace what they never took time to understand. They looked at your fruit, but didn't see your roots. They envied your glow without recognizing the grief that shaped it. They wanted the oil, but not the crushing that produced it. And that's why it never worked. Because true anointing isn't inherited by imitation. It's unlocked through obedience, through fire, through the places no one volunteers to go. And you went there, willingly, quietly, faithfully. You went through seasons where no one validated you. No one checked in. No one noticed how much you were carrying, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. But you kept moving, not because you felt strong, but because you believed there was more. Because somewhere deep inside, you knew this wasn't the end. And you were right. Now the shift is here. You can feel it. The air around you has changed. Doors that used to be shut are beginning to open without you knocking. People who overlooked you are suddenly drawn to your presence. Opportunities are finding you, not because you chased them, but because you became ready. You let the fire refine you, not define you. You didn't just survive, you transformed. You didn't just wait, you prepared. And preparation always precedes promotion. This is the season where everything that was hidden inside of you begins to surface, not as performance, but as presence. You walk into rooms now not needing to prove anything, because your energy speaks before you do, because you're aligned, because you become who you were always meant to be, and there's no force in the universe more powerful than someone who knows who they are. You're no longer explaining yourself to those who misread you. You're no longer trying to fit into places that made you shrink. You're no longer available for counterfeit connections or shallow recognition. You've tasted too much depth. You've outgrown too many masks. And now, you're walking in clarity, in purpose, in divine timing. The irony? Those who tried to replace you are now searching for what only you carried. But it's too late, not out of revenge, but revelation. Because they never understood that presence is a product of process. And they skipped the process. They wanted a crown without the cross. They wanted the light without becoming a lighthouse. They wanted your harvest, but they rejected your humility. But not you. You chose the narrow path. You chose the secret place. You chose to grow in silence, to be pruned by purpose, to rise with dignity when you could have sought revenge. And now you're rising, not just to be seen, but to serve. To walk boldly in the assignment you were born for. To become a beacon for those who feel like they've been forgotten. To remind them that the ones heaven calls are never truly hidden. They're just being readied. And you, chosen one, are ready. And now, after everything, the silence, the rejection, the waiting, you finally see it. None of it was wasted. The battles built you. The isolation prepared you. And the delay was never denial. You weren't being replaced. You were being refined. The doors that closed weren't punishment. They were protection. And the very people who once overlooked you will soon witness your rise. Not out of ego, but destiny. Because the one thing they couldn't replicate was your authenticity. You remained true. You remained aligned. And now the time has come. The final piece is falling into place. And you're not just stepping into a new season. You're stepping into the reason you were chosen. This is your confirmation. You were never meant to be replaced, because you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to lead.